Most of you, my name is Chris Silva. I'm the president and CEO of the Taunton Area Chamber of Commerce. We're really, really grateful to have with us today Dr. Kryzanek, who is the professor emeritus of political science at Bridgewater State University. And during his years in the political science department, he was the longest serving chairperson and helped launch the Master of Public Administration program. After leaving the department in 2015, Dr. Kryzanek was appointed the executive director of the Minnock Center for International Engagement, with responsibility for expanding the university's global presence. From 2016 to 19, Dr. Kryzanek was the academic director in the Public Management Institute for the U.S. State Department's Young African Leaders Initiative that brought 25 fellows to the campus as Mandela Fellows. He continues as a consultant for that program. And currently, he is participating in Bridgewater State Senior College, where he teaches courses on American politics and government. Dr. Kryzanek received a PhD from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's the author of 8 books on U.S. foreign policy, American government, and comparative politics. His latest book, written with his daughter, Dr. Ann Carruth, is 25 Issues That Shape American Politics, Debates, Differences, and Divisions. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Kryzanek.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for arranging this opportunity for me to talk to all these members of the chamber in Taunton about the election. As has been my practice through the years here, I will try to be fair and balanced and nonpartisan and give you my views based on the facts that are before us. 2 things I'm going to try to do today. First of all, we're going to be talking about issues related to the economy and the business sector and the overall general view of where the American economy is and where it may be headed. And then because a number of these challenges that we're facing require an action by whoever becomes the president on November 5th. And so I'll be talking not only about the state of the economy, but some of the positions that former President Donald Trump has stated and the current Vice President Kamala Harris has stated. And then we'll shift and give you some background of where the election is at the present time. Of course, it's not easy. I'm not going to predict anything, so don't ask me what's going to happen because I don't know and nobody knows. So, but we'll give you some idea of what are some of the steps along the way that are going to be required in order to come to a conclusion of this long campaign. So, and again, as I mentioned to Chris earlier, please don't hesitate to ask any questions. There should be some 15 minutes or so at the end in which I can respond to any questions that you have. If you'd like, you can also email me, and that I'll give you that, and maybe even Chris might probably have that as well. Be happy to answer anything that may be on your mind. Okay, with that, let's talk about the current economic situation in the United States, and then move on to public policy from the Trump and Harris campaign. It's important to realize that in some of the public opinion polling that has come up, only about 25% of the Americans say the country is on the right track. Only 25%. Now, that's not a very healthy number there, and pointing to the fact that the economy remains the #1 issue that is currently before these 2 candidates, and will remain at the center point. When the American people say it's not on the right track, they're referring primarily to the economic track that we're not on at the present time. The #1 issue with regard to the economy remains inflation. The inflation rate is currently somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 to 3% officially, as presented by the Labor Department and the Council of Economic Advisors. But that inflation rate really doesn't get at the heart of why people are upset. It's not only the fact that things were much better before the COVID. In terms of money in their pockets, it's a matter of what is often called affordability. It's not something that is determined by the overall goods and services, the price of goods and services across the board, but certainly rents and gas and food and the essentials of life. As an example, food has gone up about 26% since 2020, 26%. And that includes a number of things that are critical to a household in terms of functioning and eating properly and feeding a family. So I'm not saying that people in the government are not telling the truth here. What they're doing is using a indices that may not include what is on the minds of the American people, and that would be rents and food and gasoline. Although gasoline has dropped a bit in the last couple of weeks. What may be of a great help along the way, or at least partial help, is the fact that the interest rates are coming down and will likely continue to come down, and the fact that the Federal Reserve has stated that they don't foresee any kind of recession in the future. That it'll either be a soft landing or no landing at all, as far as that's concerned. So certainly we're going to see some easing of car loans and credit card debt during this period of time. The American people have run up a good deal of credit on their credit cards, and that has created an enormous challenge to individual families and individuals. What is beneficial to the American public is the jobs data, which just came up a couple of days ago. 250,000 new jobs as presented by the Labor Department. And that was a surprise, and one that is encouraging, that is the source of why Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is not concerned with a collapse of the economy or a very serious recession. The other part of this, though, is that although more and more jobs are being filled, and the unemployment rate went from 4.2 to 4.1, when we're in the 3 range, it means we're pretty much at full employment. So it's still a little bit of ways from that, but it's a matter of employment and also wage growth. And so one of the reasons for the inflation rate is that even though people have jobs, their wages are not keeping pace with the inflation rate that's there, which is, as I say, 2.5 to 3. And this is what the grumbling is about. And certainly it's justified that yes, they have a job, but yes, they're not making the kind of money that would help them achieve a solid economic foundation for themselves and their family. The other number that you should be aware of if you want to get a migraine headache at 12:02 or 12:10 here is that the national debt is $35.27 trillion. That's with a T, $35.27 trillion. The deficit for this fiscal year will be something in the neighborhood of $1.9 to $2 trillion. That, of course, is during the time of the Biden and Harris administration. If you have a couple of minutes, you might want to just go on to what's called the debt clock. If you go to Washington, D.C., there's a big clock in the center of the city on a building there, and it shows how many millions of dollars we're in debt every second, every minute of this time period that we're in. So we're in serious debt. And we'll get to the solutions or the attempts to solve that in a second. So we're not doing badly, but we're not doing great, and there's a lot of dissatisfaction among the American people, which makes the economy the #1 issue that both Trump and Harris will have to face in the coming 30 days or so. So let's talk about public policy here. Let's start with Donald Trump. His tax policy is one that has been supported and criticized by Kamala Harris and others, and supported by his own supporters. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act is set to expire in 2025. Donald Trump wants to extend that act which to a large extent spread tax benefits across the board, but mainly to those individuals with incomes over $450,000. Again, this is often the criticism of Democrats that these are millionaire tax cuts, billionaire tax cuts. But the tax cuts are across the board, although who's benefiting them? Likely those people at the upper end of the economic scale. So extending that piece of legislation would be a critical step should Donald Trump win the presidency. The other issue that's most important these days is Donald Trump talking about his tariff policy and controversial tariff policy. If he were to win, 60% of the new tariffs would be on Chinese goods, and the other 20% would be on everything else, leaving another 20% that would likely not be touched along the way. But clearly, this is an attempt to challenge the Chinese, and would be a continuation of what Donald Trump did when he was in office from 2016 to 2020. Now, the issue is, what is the impact of these tariffs should he win, and should he be capable of moving the tariffs forward, which would largely be by executive action on his part. From 2018 to 2019, Trump raised what is often viewed as taxes from the tariffs of about $80 billion that was associated with primarily Chinese goods coming into the United States. It's important to remember, though, that Joe Biden also kept some of the tariffs, and those were worth about $18 billion increase on the goods that Biden was interested in controlling and stopping from China, primarily microchips and electronic devices and the like. So both of these presidents, former President Trump and now current President Biden, it did engage in a tariff policies, although Trump continued to harp on the fact that we need more, and that if he is the president, he would increase tariffs primarily on goods from China. What this means, and the Tax Foundation, which you may have heard of, is a nonpartisan organization, and many prominent economists are of the opinion that the tariff policy, if it's put into action, would have a detrimental impact on household income. The household income would shrink by something in the neighborhood of $625 or $600 to $700. Our gross domestic product would decrease by about 0.8% to a percentage point, and unemployment would increase, or employment would be down somewhere in the neighborhood of almost $700,000. That's 700,000 people, men and women, in the workplace. So major economists are of the opinion that this is not a good idea, that it would create a drain on the economy. It would create problems associated with employment and growth, and it is something that would be a inflationary problem associated with the cost of goods going up because of the tariffs that would be placed on items primarily from China. There are even those who are from the economics class who are of the opinion that this could lead to some kind of depression, and they mentioned 1929 when the Smoot-Hawley Act and tariffs were brought into place, and was one of the contributors to the Great Depression. So you hear that going on. I don't know whether that's scare tactics or what, but certainly there are very few economists who are supporting the Trump tariffs, even though Trump is of the opinion that this would increase taxes, and it would be a means of bringing jobs back to the United States and taking them out of the hands of the Chinese. So we'll just have to see how that works. Of course, he has to win, and there'd be a pretty good fight in Congress and the American public over this tariff policy or proposed tariff policy. Then you have Kamala Harris and her proposed policies. Again, I'm not suggesting that Trump is only about tariffs and tax cuts, but that's pretty much what he has emphasized, where Kamala Harris has talked about a number of different proposed programs, all of which would require congressional support if that were the case. Um, a couple of things that come to mind here. Harris is for an increase in the income tax rate from 37% to 39.6%. So about a 2.5% increase in individual income tax. Those individuals who have a net worth or net wealth of over $100 million would pay a minimum tax on unrealized capital gains from stocks, bonds, and privately held companies. Okay. And again, it's not stated what that minimum tax would be. But nevertheless, this is again her program in which she appears to be going after the millionaires and the billionaires and the corporate America. In fact, the corporate tax rate under her program would go from 21% to 28%. And again, Donald Trump brought that down to that 21% level. Harris has said there would be no tax increase for anyone making less than $400,000. Okay. Again, this is a fairly large number when she talks about the middle class. I don't know too many people who consider themselves middle class and make $400,000. But the point is that the policies, the tax policies, would be directed primarily to those people at the high end, hundreds of millions, billions, and the like. Also, besides tax policy, there are a number of incentives that Harris has pushed for. One would be a manufacturing investment, tax credits to domestic manufacturers, and to invest in sectors that she is defining as the manufacturing jobs of the next century. Undefined of what those manufacturing jobs of the next century would be. But nevertheless, there would be tax credits to domestic manufacturers for the purposes of starting a business or developing a particular product that would be helpful in the next century. Then there is the one that's been talked a great deal about, and that is the small business tax credit, $50,000 for an individual or group of individuals who are starting a small business, an opportunity to have that kind of wealth behind from the United States in order to start that business. And her goal is to have 25 million new business applications that come within the first couple of years, again, associated with the fact that there's this $50,000 out there that would be used by individuals to start a small business, undefined what that small business would be. Then we have the child tax credit, $6,000 for newborns, $3,600 for children under 6, and $3,000 for children over 6. Again, the argument that's made by Harris is that as a result of the COVID policies of the Biden administration, childhood poverty was cut by 50%. Of course, that Biden policy also put millions and millions and millions of dollars into the economy and was certainly a key contributor to the inflation rate that we have right now. The argument again by Biden and others is that this kind of increase in support for those people at the lower end of the scale not only cut poverty in half, but also contributed to, in part, the inflation rate that we are facing and have faced and will maybe continue to face in the future. And then there's the earned income tax credit, which is largely directed towards poor people, and that would be raised to about $1,500. Again, tax credits, tax incentives, either for business or those people at the bottom of the economic scale. This all costs money, and the criticism that is often made of the Harris proposals that are out there is that it would increase the national debt yearly. In the next 10 years, conservative think tanks point to the fact that the deficit would increase by $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years as a result of these Harris programs that she has suggested would happen if, of course, if she wins. So you know, the argument on either side, whether it's Trump and his tariffs or Harris and her incentives and investments, are going to create a debt no matter what. The question is how much debt they will create and whether they can be offset by tax increases on the wealthy if you are a Kamala Harris supporter. So we'll just have to see. A couple of things that I did mention quickly earlier on is that there does not appear to be at the present time, either whether from Jerome Powell or others in the know, for any kind of recession or certainly even a depression. We're doing much better than the Europeans. The Germans are seeing a decrease in their economy and facing the equivalent of a mild recession, and others as well, Italy and others. We are not facing that, and it looks like we're not going to be facing any kind of recession if the Federal Reserve and other business executives are correct on that. So that's a good sign. And the employment figures of that $250,000 that I mentioned clearly was an example of how things seem to be moving in a positive direction. We'll just have to see. One date to keep in mind, on November 1st is the monthly jobs report, and also there's going to be an inflation report. And so we'll have to see, you know, that's a couple of days before the election. Should job growth continue or job growth decline, that could have some impact on the voting public. So the next date of importance is November 1 when the jobs report goes up. There's also around that time as well an inflation report also, which again is clearly on the minds of many Americans. The other thing to emphasize is that one of the positive viewpoints, at least from the standpoint of the Kamala Harris administration or program, I should say, or views, is that the stock market continues to be doing very well, or at least better than some people anticipated. There doesn't appear to be a bear market on the immediate horizon. I have to be very careful about that because I don't basically make those kinds of predictions. But if in fact the stock market continues to move upward, as some have said, then that again is a positive sign for the Democratic side if that continues. Again, we'll have to see how that happens. We still have 30 days, and a lot can happen in 30 days. So with that in mind, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time. As I want to give you some time to talk and discuss some of these issues that are important with regard to tax policy and inflation and the like. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the election, because if we're going to do any of this, whether it's tariffs or whether it's tax policy, whether it's investments, whether it's credits, whether it's a recession, whether it's unemployment, all of those are going to be addressed by whoever becomes the next president of the United States. And again, unless you've been living on another planet somewhere, it is very close. There's not a legitimate polling organization that doesn't say that this is a landslide victory for either of the candidates, Trump or Kamala Harris. But let me go through some of these critical ingredients of the election process that as I say, will clearly impact some of the suggested economic and fiscal policies that I've been mentioned a little bit earlier. First of all, I think all of you know that the president is elected as a result of 270 electoral votes, winning a state and carrying those electoral votes. Right now, according to CNN and others, the Kamala Harris camp is slightly ahead. They have guaranteed 226 electoral votes. By guaranteed, I mean that they're way above the margin of error. Places like California, as an example, Washington State, Massachusetts, right? So 226 electoral votes for Harris, 219 for Trump. Obviously, not a big spread there. That's going to be a critical ingredient in terms of who gets that 270 electoral votes and comes away with an alleged victory. Reason I'm saying alleged victory is that if any of you out there like to stay up on a Tuesday night and have a election party and have a couple of drinks and enjoy watching the news, this election is not going to be settled on that Tuesday night, maybe even on the next day or the day after that, because as an example, the state of Georgia is going to hand count the votes, a critical battleground state. So it depends on how long this is going to take to determine who got the 270 electoral votes. Right now, Harris is up nationally in terms of support from the American people overall, not state by state, but overall, by about 6% of the vote. But as you know, that is not the critical ingredient. Hillary Clinton was up by a large margin of the individual American voter vote and lost the election to Donald Trump. But right now, she is ahead with respect to the overall vote cast. But the critical ingredients are those 7 battleground states, and they are the so-called blue wall of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then the so-called southern strategy of North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. I don't know whether that's south or what, but it's south of the middle of the country. Right now, it would appear that Harris has some edge, some minor edge, some very minor edge in places like Wisconsin and Michigan and Nevada. Trump appears to have some advantage, a narrow advantage in North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona. It's Pennsylvania in terms of who gets those 19 electoral votes. We'll just have to see. If Harris gets Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, then it's pretty much over, at least in terms of the 270. But that remains very, very uncertain. Right now, Harris is up by about less than 1% of the vote. And the key issue here in terms of the economy is that Donald Trump clearly has the significant support as the individual who can bring the economy around as he defines it, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 11 or 12% of the vote. Same thing with immigration. The American people believe that Donald Trump would be best for the economy and Donald Trump would be best for the immigration policy. And so those are two areas that certainly give him a significant edge here if we're talking about getting a percentage of the vote or going after those 1 to 2% of people who are undecided and need to have it, and that would have an impact on the overall vote. Okay. The key voting blocks that you may be aware of that are out there is, of course, Donald Trump's base, his support that is rock solid, is not going anywhere in the 35 to around 35%. But again, working class men, um, Hispanic males, African American males, and independent males. As you can see here, when I use the word males, there's a big gap here, big gender gap between women and men. Men seem to be gravitating towards Donald Trump. Women, as a result of perhaps the reproductive freedoms and others as well, seem to be on the side of Kamala Harris. But this is kind of turning into a men versus women election, at least in terms of the votes that are out there. So we'll just have to see whether that continues on, or whether Harris can tap into the male vote, or whether Donald Trump can tap into the female vote. We'll just have to see. Then there's often discussed as something like the October surprise, uh, going back to the Nixon era and beyond. There are those who feel that a campaign, either side, Republican or Democrat, Trump or Harris, will try to spring a surprise action or scandal or policy that sways the election to go after those very small numbers of voters that are out there. One of the surprises is this Jack Smith, who had that filing that would create more questions in the mind of voters about Donald Trump's behavior on January 6th. Um, the question of some of these scandals with regard to the war, not scandals, but the war in Iran, the war in Gaza, the war in Beirut and Lebanon, all creating a problem for the United States foreign policy, our standing in the world, our ability to provide military assistance to the Israelis as they continue to go after what they consider to be terrorist organizations. And then there's also Russian and Chinese, but particularly Russian disinformation, or information that's clearly designed to create a question in the minds of the American voter about Trump or Kamala Harris. In this case, I think most people would agree that the Russians, Putin, is supportive of Donald Trump, and if there would be some disinformation program, it would likely be directed towards Kamala Harris. And so in October, the remainder of the days that are left here, we'll just have to see to what extent there is a October surprise. A couple of just things in conclusion here. The election is held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, which is really kind of odd. The founding fathers put that together because they weren't too crazy about Western farmers and people who are not part of the economic and business elite participating in the election. So they made it difficult for them to participate by putting it on a Tuesday in November, where it's cold, where it may even be snowy, where it's dark outside. And so what I'm getting at here is that turnout becomes very important. Who goes to the polls? And if you know your own situation, probably you get your first cold in November. You experience some sleet and snow perhaps in November. And so we'll just have to see who's going to show up and whether there's going to be an impact on turnout as a result of the weather. Besides the turnout, though, there are what's often called down ballot elections, and that is control of the Senate, control of the House. Right now, the Democrats have more senatorial seats to win at than the Republicans, and they're not doing well in Montana, where Democratic Senator John Tester is losing pretty badly, at least at the present time, unless he's able to turn around. If he loses, and Joe Manchin is retiring, and his replacement is a Republican, the Republicans will gain a majority in the United States Senate. Okay, and that's a good for the Republicans. Not so good if Kamala Harris were to become the president of the United States. There is some question about this, though, because Senator Cruz in Texas and Senator Scott in Florida are being challenged by two very adept Democratic uh, challengers, and it's quite possible that one of those two could flip to the Democratic side. Right now, Cruz and Scott are ahead, but they're not ahead by very much. And so we're really talking about who's going to control the Senate. And if it's the Republicans, that spells a difficulty if Harris is the individual winner. Then there is the House of Representatives, where right now it would appear that the Democrats have a chance to retake the House of Representatives, again, by a very, very narrow margin. No one can predict with accuracy, but there is a pretty good examples of them doing reasonably well. If you look at some of these pollsters and some of these prognosticators, they do suggest that the Democrats could take the House, and that would obviously change the Speaker of the House and have an impact on economic and fiscal public policies. And then the other thing to be aware of is that I mentioned, to be fact, don't have too many election parties that night, because there's going to be legal challenges on both sides. People are zeroing in on the fact that Donald Trump will challenge the election as he did in 2020, but it may be the same thing with Kamala Harris if she feels that the election has been rigged or stolen against her in some states, Georgia as an example. And so each candidate has an army of election lawyers. And I mean, when army, I mean 30, 40 election lawyers on each side, prepared for challenges to the vote count in individual states, particularly in those battleground states. And that could drag on for days, if not weeks. We're supposed to have this thing wrapped up in early January, and then have the inauguration in January 20th. It may not happen, so we'll just have to see how that works out. And then, of course, finally, there's always the concern about, will there be a repeat of January 6th? Will there be a challenge to the vote count? And we'll have to determine that whether that's a serious matter or whether that's just idle talk. So with that, I'm going to stop here. So give you some questions, whether it's on the policies, economic policies of Trump and Harris, or whether it is questions related to the election. So happy to answer anything, and I'll turn it over to Chris, I guess, who can moderate this if there are any questions. Happy to respond.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you so much. That was really incredibly informative. As with so many things about this election, slightly terrifying.
Maybe too many. Maybe too many.
Huh? So yeah, I'll open it up to any questions anyone may have, follow-ups, or any topics that maybe weren't touched upon. You'd like to hear Dr. Kryzanek's take.
Is it fair to ask where you think the election might land? Is that a fair question or a non-fair question?
Well, all I can say is that there's a number of legitimate polls. There's a lot of polls out there. If you look at some of the list of polling organizations, these organizations are in the 20 and 30 range, and as a result of that, some are probably accurate, some are probably not accurate, and are not well respected. The New York Times is one that's gives a slight edge at the present time to Donald Trump in the battleground states. The Bloomberg organization has something called Morning Consult, and they give a little bit of the edge to Kamala Harris. And then you have a number of other organizations, the YouGovernment, The Economist. I could go on, but all of them admit that it's very, very close within the so-called margin of error, which is around 3 to 4%. As an example, Pennsylvania is something around 1% for Kamala Harris. That's insignificant. I mean, it doesn't have any kind of effect on the vote, because it would suggest that it's too close to call. Same thing with Nevada. When you're in Michigan and Wisconsin, they're kind of approaching around 2%, which is still within the margin of error. And so Harris would need Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and probably Nevada, which is around 1%. Again, all of those are very, very small and could turn very, very easily. Same thing with Donald Trump with North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona, those three in particular. All three of those are in the 1 to 2% so-called margin of error. Right now, the pollsters and the pundits are all saying that there's probably just a couple of thousand people in each state. When I say a couple, it could be 10, 15,000, but a fairly small margin of people who will swing this election one way or the other, if they're right. And I say it's a big if. So I don't know whether so the answer is I don't know. Nobody knows, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. And it may not play out at all until Wednesday, Thursday, maybe later on in that week.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I do have a couple of folks on the call on the healthcare. I didn't know if you had any insights on each of the candidates and their stance on making kind of either the universal healthcare or more affordable healthcare, certainly
Right.
with pharmaceuticals and that kind of thing. So I didn't know if you had any insight on that.
Well, the Trump campaign and the Republican side has always emphasized the fact that they would either reduce or get rid of Obamacare, which at the present time is a fairly popular healthcare program. But they would replace it with something associated with the private sector. In other words, individuals having their own private sector fund that they would develop on their own, and tied to the stock market and tied to other forms of economic growth. And they would get the government out of it, to make a long story short. The criticism of Kamala Harris of Trump is that he had the opportunity and didn't achieve his promise to get rid of Obamacare. He mentions it again, but doesn't have an alternative to it. The alternative would somehow be in the private sector, but that's not a sufficient response to make people feel better about their health care, especially since, as I say, Obamacare is popular. And of course, it's a government program, just like Social Security and Medicare, which, the three of them, government funded, government involvement, but all three generally very, very popular. I don't want to say very popular, but certainly popular. So it's a long road for the Republicans and the Trump administration to move to a private sector healthcare program. It's not impossible to do, but it would be in many ways associated with the stock market, associated with personal wealth growth on the part of individuals to pay for their healthcare needs. If that helps.
Yes, thank you so much for that.
Okay.
Mike, I had a question. So I work in the defense industry. What do you see on both sides, either side, depending on who wins, where our defense is going, where our budgets are going, and about our troops? Do you think that any of that is going to persuade the election results?
I think so. I mean, the Trump campaign and the supporters of Trump are of the opinion that Kamala Harris would not be a strong military leader in the future, and that she may use resources that would be associated not with the military, but with food and housing and healthcare and the like. I'm not speaking for her, but I mean the perception out there is that Donald Trump would be much better for the military and for the military development. Although you have to be very, very fair about this, is that there are those who feel that Donald Trump has made too many statements against the military, against, suckers and losers and that kind of, whether it's a joke or whether he doesn't mean it or not, doesn't make any difference. But I think that if he were to become president, I think there'd be an emphasis on the United States using its military might in a way to advance our foreign policy interest. Where the view of Kamala Harris is that she wouldn't be as strong. Again, the American people seem to be, those people who are supportive of Donald Trump see him as a strong man, whatever that means. I have no idea what that means, but they don't see her as a strong leader, and therefore she's constantly trying to emphasize the fact that she would use her position as president to increase military spending or do it in a way that makes the United States continues to make a major military force. So again, I don't know where that is, because that's something that is a budgetary matter. Right now, I think we're spending somewhere in $787 billion for defense, something along those ways. But the question is, what about the next year and the year after that? And if you have Kamala Harris shifting resources in a different way, or if you have Donald Trump increasing the amount on because he wants to show his strength, well, that may have an impact. We'll have to see.
Thanks, Mike.
Chris, I don't think I did that well. I mean, there's got to be people out there who have some kind of.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is your opinion as far as, the economy and the climate, as far as what the government is responsible for and where the responsibility lies kind of within these large corporations and for lack of a better term, corporate greed?
Yeah. Kamala Harris, as one response to you, is that say that she claims to be going after the price gougers in the economy. I don't know how she's going to do that, but that's clearly viewed as an anti-business point of view. And many in the corporate sector, I think, see Donald Trump as a better alternative with respect to corporate development and taxation. As I mentioned to you, the corporate tax rate would increase under Kamala Harris, that kind of thing. And individuals at the top end of the scale, corporate leaders, would see a tax on their wealth. And so when we're talking about the economy and the role of the corporations, I think the view is still that Harris and the Democrats are not pro-business, even though they claim Kamala Harris is talking about investing in small business. I think the Democrats are talking about small business, and they're talking about manufacturing incentives at the small level, not necessarily at the mega corporations that are out, or Wall Street, or hedge fund managers. They don't talk about that a great deal at all, and one would have to come to the conclusion that that's not where their priorities are. Their priorities are small scale, middle of the road manufacturing, that kind of thing is where they're at. So, and as a result of that, I think the view among many in the business class was that they feel safer with Donald Trump.
Thank you.
If that helps.
I have one last question. In all the years that you've been doing this, how has the people characterize it as like the American dream? You can do anything you want to do. You just have to have the fortitude and the will and all of that. And I know that, but I'm curious about your opinion in what you know about how people have been able to or not been able to get out of poverty or move up in classes from years ago, even 25 years ago, to today.
Yeah. That's one of the arguments that's made by Trump and his supporters is that young people, as an example, Generation Z and as they're called, or people in their mid-20s or early 30s, can't buy a house. They don't have the financial resources to do it, to get a mortgage, or they're not making enough money to do it. And therefore they see how mom and dad did it, and they look back at the time of the 50s and 60s when people could easily purchase major goods. I mean, a home as an example. And right now rents are off the charts. Mortgages are still very, very high. The need for a down payment is very, very critical because people aren't making as much as they think they should be making, and they blame this all on the Democrats. So when you see Trump doing well among many people, it's zeroing in on the economy, not just the inflation, but the fact is that they blame the Democrats for the inability of many people to live the life that their parents have lived back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, something along those lines. These are very troubling times for people who are in their mid-20s, early 30s, and want to live a life that's equal to how their parents might have lived or have lived.
And do you see that changing with either one of these candidates?
No, I don't mean to be flip about it, but I mean, if let's just say Harris wins, all right, and she wants to put these programs in for small business, or she wants to provide a tax credit for children, or she wants to provide manufacturing opportunities, the opportunity environment. That all sounds good, and I'm not, saying it isn't. But again, these would all require major pieces of legislation. There's a cost to all of this, and in her view, the way to solve this is to just tax the people at the high end. That's unpopular as well. And so to do what she wants to do, if people agree that's what she should be doing and what is necessary, that's costly, and also it requires a legislative system that would allow her to pass major legislation. As an example, we still have the filibuster rule, 60 votes necessary for major pieces of legislation. Well, that's when you have the opportunity to have a Senate that's either tied or one vote above one or the other. How are you going to pass legislation when you're going to need 8, 9 other votes, whether it's Democrat or Republican? And so we could be at a standstill where it sounds good. Same thing with Donald Trump and his tariffs. It sounds good. It may be what people think should happen, but it's a matter of, can it happen? Can it happen in a highly polarized and partisan system of governance that doesn't seem to be moving in one way or the other? As some people have said, the only way to break this is to have a landslide victory of one of the two candidates. And don't ask me who that's going to be, but I mean, if there would be some kind of significant victory, something in the neighborhood of, let's say, 55, 56% of the vote, which I don't think is going to happen, then you get a pretty good margin of victory there, that person would say, look, I've got a lot of support here in the United States, and I'm going to do this, and that. But again, if we believe the polls, it's not going to be that way. It's going to be 50-50, 51-49, that kind of thing in terms of the percentage of the vote. And the Electoral College will also be likely very narrow. It all depends on whether these pollsters know what they're talking about. Many people have said that what happened in 2016 and 2020 is that there was an undercounting of the Trump vote, that Trump people, when they are a question on a phone or online, may not be truthful. I'm not saying they're all liars. What I'm just saying is that there appears to be a difficult problem trying to get at what the Trump vote really is compared to what the vote would be for Kamala Harris. So we'll just have to see how accurate they are.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, just go ahead.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm from a nonprofit, and we've had a lot of meetings lately regarding donor support. We're 100% privately funded, and how inflation has affected that. So, do you have a prediction based on who would win and how that might affect the general American population and their generosity and donating to nonprofits and such?
Well, Americans have historically been very, very generous in terms of helping out nonprofits. But the question then becomes, if Harris, let's just say, goes after millionaires and billionaires, and if that is successful in her to do that, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying this is what she has said. Will those people at the high end contribute as they have in the past, or would that be a problem in terms of contributions? I'm on the board of Father Bill's in Mainspring in the Brockton and Quincy area, and so far we've been pretty fortunate in terms of gaining support financially from people at the high end. But the election hasn't happened yet, and we haven't had a person in the office who would have a reason to give a honest answer of what tax policy would be. If it's Harris, it's going to be a tax policy that does and that takes away some wealth from people at the high end. If it's the Trump view, it's going to be totally different. I don't know whether that helps you, but the point is we still haven't have a determination of who's going to have the opportunity to define tax policies and income generation in this country.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions? We have just a few minutes, or else we'll wrap things up. Thank you very much. We're all just waiting to see what's going to happen.
Just don't wait too long. That's all, because don't wait till CNN calls it on 9 o'clock on Tuesday. It ain't going to happen that way. So, but I enjoyed speaking to all of you, and hopefully it's been helpful. And I think that Chris put my email address there somewhere on the
Yes.
If you have any further questions, I'd be happy to respond to you. And again, great meeting you, and congratulations to the Taunton Chamber of Commerce and Chris.
Thank you very much.
Under Chris's leadership. Let's put it that way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
See you all later.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good day.
All right, thank you.